Hello everyone, to celebrate the new year and the release of my Shopify Liquid module on shopifythemedeveloper.com, let's talk about 9 of the newer features to Shopify Liquid since I started this channel in 2019. So back in 2019, I made my longest and most successful video to date on this channel about Shopify Liquid. It's a 50-minute crash course on the basics of Shopify Liquid, and the concepts within the video are as relevant today as they were back then. You see, while Shopify seems to make frequent updates to the admin, the Shopify Liquid language has largely stayed the same since 2019, basically only changing when it needs to take advantage of new features. To keep on top of the changes as they arise, I think it's a good idea to bookmark and refer back to the Shopify changelog on a regular basis. But unfortunately, the changelog only goes back a year from now, so it's kind of hard for me to provide a complete list of what has changed in between that date and when I first made my video. That being said, I decided to sift through the documentation to find any objects, filters, tags, or attributes that didn't exist when I first started coding using Shopify Liquid, and I found about 9 topics that stood out. If you want to skip ahead to the section that is most interesting to you, check out the chapters of the video. Otherwise, keep watching to hear the full list. Without further ado, let's jump onto the computer and let's take a look. All right, I'm going to start this tutorial off looking at the Liquid reference. We're going to refer to this a lot during this video, and I want to make a disclaimer here that I don't have the full changelog as I mentioned in the intro, so I'm basing this video off of memory since I started in 2019. Some of the stuff we talk about might not actually be new features, but they're new to me. And that's generally an indication that it's something that is not used often because, I do theme development, on a weekly basis. And if I haven't heard of it, then it's probably not that common of a feature anyway, okay? So we'll cover in the first few stuff that's definitely new since 2019, and that is good to know. But as we get down to the smaller points, maybe they existed since 2019, I'm not quite sure, but there's stuff that I noticed going through this documentation with fresh eyes after first going through it completely in 2019. Okay, so I've also got up here my testing shop, which is the development store that I'm going to be using for today's video. And then in terms of where I'm going to write my code today, I'm going to use the same project as I used for the Shopify Liquid module within the Shopify Theme Developer course. So if you've already worked on this inside the course, then you can continue on, but it's not important that you have your folder structure set up like mine. I'm only choosing this theme because it's super bare bones and it's easy for us to actually just look at the Liquid side of things and not get too caught up on HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all the other things that go on in your Shopify theme. All right, so I know I said without further ado before, but I had to make that disclaimer and set the scene for the environment that we're going to use for this video. But now, without further ado, let's get into our first topic, which is media. All right, so as we can see here on Shopify's official blog, product media came out around this time. So shortly after 2019, maybe a year after. And this change meant that instead of just images in your product, you could have media. So you could have images, external videos, internal videos, and models. So the first thing we're going to look at is this newer media object and how to use it. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is run the Shopify CLI command to run this theme through my development store testing shop. So we'll just wait for that to happen there. And then it'll give us the URL right here. So I'll click on that to open that up right here. As you can see, very ugly project, but super bare bones. I use this project to demonstrate Shopify Liquid features, as I said, without getting bogged down on the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, so in order to work with this product media, we're going to need to go to a product template. So we're going to have to go to a product page, and you can see here we're loading the product template. But I've actually got some media in a folder for a particular product that I haven't created yet. So I'm going to create that right now. I'm going to go into my development store admin, click add product, and the media I have are for Apple AirPods. So that's going to be our example product for this, AirPods, and I'll locate the folder right here, AirPods Media. Select each of these like this, open it up. There you go. And you can see there's also a link to an external video. So I'll just need to open a Finder window, go back into that folder. So I've got this file here with a YouTube video link. So I'll take that, click add from URL, paste that in there, click add file, and then I'll hit save on that. All right, cool. So let's go over to here and let's navigate to that product page. So let's check the handle. The handle is AirPods, easy. Okay, so we can go AirPods like this. And now you can see we've got one image coming through. Now, why have we got one image? Well, if we look inside our code, let's go to the product JSON template, which is linking to the product template section. So we'll dive into here. This is where our code is for the product template. And let's minimize this a little bit, move this over a little bit. And we're not focused on the product form, so I'm just going to comment all of that out. And let's draw our attention right here to the product title and then the image below it. So as you can see, all we've got, apart from the layout, which sits above it, is the title and the product image. And if we look at the code of how we're getting that product image, we're literally just using the image URL filter on the product object. Super simple. So we can do this on any product. We can run image URL on an object like a product, and it will find an image for us. All right. But if there are multiple images, we would obviously show it in a different way. And before media came out, the way we would do it is if I write just below here, commenting out the first line for image in, because we've got an array of images, product images, and then end for, we can copy this. And I believe we were able to put image right here. I'll hit save on that, refresh over here, and you'll see that we've got both images coming up now. Now, obviously this still works, but since around 2022, when this feature got expanded, we now have the ability to render other product media that we've uploaded here, including internal videos, external videos, and 3D models. So instead of using product.images, we're going to want to loop through product.media. And if I do that and I hit save and refresh over here, you'll see that we get all the media coming through, but it's all coming through as an image. So if we take what's now a media file, which could be an image, but it could be other stuff. Let's rename this to make a bit more sense. And you'll see here that even if it's a video or a 3D model, there's still an image that is being able to be pulled off of it. So there might be some situations where you want to handle 3D models and videos as an image, maybe a thumbnail until the video loads. But if you are trying to render a video or a 3D model, obviously we're going to have to handle it differently and not put it in an image tag. Okay, so what we can do is if we look in the Liquid reference, let's have a look at this object, which is media. Scroll down to media, or we could search it up here. And as you can see here, it's an abstract object that can represent an image, a model, a video, or an external video, okay? And the way we can tell what type it is via this media underscore type property. So what we're gonna do is set up a if then else statement. So if media type, and you can see here that I've got some auto filling coming from the Liquid extension that I'm using. It's the official one, if anyone is interested. Shopify Liquid by Shopify, just as a side note there. And so now, actually I need to go in here and say equals image. Now, if we go back to our page, it will only show the images right here. And so the other media just won't show. But we actually want them to show, we just need to handle them differently. So I'm going to put in an else if here. And if the media type, let's tackle the next one, which we'll do as video, which is internal video. So a video that's been uploaded to that actual section. And for this, Shopify provides some handy filters that make it easy to output certain tags based on the media type. So let's look inside the documentation for that. I'll go into our filters section here, look in the category for media,
and then we can scroll down to find video tag, right? So as you can see here, super simple. Actually, we're going to do exactly this. So I can even copy and paste that code. Actually, I'm using an else if, so I'll just write it here, media video tag. Okay, so let me save that and head back over to here, and you can see here that we get a video tag, but for some reason it shows up really weird. So we just need to pass in a few extra attributes. As you scroll down here, you can see that we can add in all these other supported HTML5 video tag attributes. So let me copy this and send through some attributes on this filter. Let's see how that changes things. And now you can see the video comes across. Obviously, it's taking up a lot of space and doesn't look great, but what we can do is pass through a width parameter, and let's set that to 200. So now you can see, just like our images, we have a width of 200. We can pass through a width of 200 on the video tag, and you can see here that it's showing up. Obviously, it's different aspect ratio to the images, so we'll need to format that a bit nicer, but you can see we get a video tag coming through quite easily just by using this video tag filter. In the case that the video is an external video, well, we just check for the media type of external video. And just like internal video, we have a filter for this as well, which is super handy. So if we refer back to the documentation, we can see here external video URL and external video tag. I'm going to copy the code here because it's different depending on if it's YouTube or Vimeo. So it's easy enough just to copy the code right here and check the host of the media. So right here, as you can see, we can check the host, and if the host is YouTube, then we're going to output it a little bit differently to if we outputted Vimeo. So we can treat it differently depending on the location of that external video. So as you can see here, we got a YouTube video coming across, and we can play that video. All right, so finally, we have the model media type. So media.media type equals model, I believe. And again, we have a tag for this. So very handy from Shopify. We can grab this model viewer tag, and yeah, I'll just copy and paste that code. Might as well save that. And as you can see, we got our internal video, our two images, our external video, and we've got our 3D model, which we can interact with on the front end like that. We don't have to install any JavaScript libraries. We don't have to do much at all. All we have to do is use this filter on the media object if it is a model, and we get this functionality out of the box. Now, obviously, we need to work with CSS and HTML to get this all to look nicely and have better UX, obviously, but essentially this is the Liquid implementation. Very simple. These filters help a lot with this new object to treat the different types of media differently depending on whether it's an image, a video, an external video, or a model. All right, so the next one we're going to talk about is Metaobjects and Metafields. Technically, they're two different things, but they're closely linked, so I'm going to cover them under the same topic. And as you might know, Metafields have been around for a long time, even before 2019, but Metaobjects are new since 2019, obviously, coming out in the last few years. On the Metafield front, though, there are some new filters as well, which are interesting. What I'm going to do here is copy and paste some code in here. It's going to be commented out to begin with, and then let's start running each of these piece by piece to explain these new Metaobjects and Metafield tags. So I'm going to paste this commented out code, and I will uncomment these out line by line. So just like we can bring in any product information anywhere on our theme if we know the handle, we can do the same thing with Metaobjects. So let's go to the documentation before I run through all of this. All right, so we're looking for the Metaobject object. So we just need to find it in the Shopify Liquid documentation, so right here. And as you can see here, there's two ways of doing it. We can do it with the dot notation, or we can do it with the square bracket notation. But essentially, If we go into my store here, I did this in the previous video on meta objects, but I created a meta object definition of creator, and I put in 3 famous people's names, and we created meta objects. So if you're interested to learn more about meta objects in detail, definitely check out my video on meta objects. I'm not going to go deep into that in today's video, but I am going to talk about the different ways we can use Liquid to work with this new meta object. Okay, so for those of you who already have watched that video, this will be mainly a refresher, but I wanted to cover it in this video because it is something that has definitely come out since 2019. So let me go back over to here, and as you can see here, the definition name is creator, and the handle of the entry is Michael Jordan, and then I grab the name attribute off that. So if I remove the name and hit save and go over here, you'll see that's definitely a meta object. The drop indicates that we're looking at an object, and then we can navigate into certain attributes by putting dot that attribute name on the end, and then we get that value. Okay? If we comment out this one and look at the next one, you can see that we can loop through something called a meta object definition in the documentation. So if we look over at the next object right here and look down to meta object underscore definition, you can see here that this is sort of the parent of the meta object entry. So you can see here that meta object represents this specific entry, but if we want to grab the definition, we will refer to this in the documentation. And so on the meta object definition object, all we have is values and values count. So you can see here that for all entries within this meta object definition, we are outputting the name attribute, Kanye West, Michael Jordan, Pharrell Williams, and the count here. So if we go back to the code, you can see here that I'm looping through all the entries within that meta object definition, and I'm outputting the name, and then I can also grab the values count, and that's where the 3 is coming from. Okay, I'll comment that out again, and we'll look at the next one. The next one relates to, get rid of the comment on the other side there. The next one relates to meta object underscore system. So here you can see this is information about the meta object that are not attribute names. So because I can create my own attributes, obviously my own fields on a meta object, we need to be able to separate that from these what's called system properties, like the ID, the type, the URL, and the handle. And where I found this particularly useful is especially with meta object pages, because we can link to specific pages showcasing a meta object, which I covered in a previous video. You can just look up meta object pages, but you can see here, if I go back to the code, I can grab the URL by putting .system after the meta object, and then I can grab URL right here. So you can see here, this one doesn't have system because this is a field that I created on the meta object, but to grab a system one, we put .system.url. We could also change this to handle whatever we wanted, as long as it's on this meta object system object. So as you can see, these are the properties right here. All right, so moving on, we're gonna look at Metafields, and then we're gonna combine the two. So the next one, I'll comment this one out, and we'll look at a Metafield that I've already set on the product. This is not anything new, but if we go through to here, you'll see that it's empty because the Metafield hasn't been set. So let me go over to my AirPods product in my admin. If I scroll down to the bottom of the page, I can see that Metafield right here. And let me put 5 in here. As you can see, it's going to be an integer. That is the Metafield type. And if I go over here, you'll see that when we refresh the page enough times, hopefully it'll work. It's delayed a little bit. We'll get the number 5 coming across. Okay. Pretty simple. That's not new Liquid since 2019. But what is new is some of the Metafield filters, which we'll get into in a little bit. And obviously, before meta objects came out, we didn't have the ability to store meta objects in Metafields, which we can now do. So I will go over to here and comment that out. And let's go into, actually, we need to add in some data for the Metafield first. So I'm going to go over here and let's add in a creator to our creators array. So I can link a meta object entry right here. So now we've got Michael Jordan in there. right? And then back here in our code, we can access a meta object via, I'm going to just take that out and only uncomment out this part. I'm going to remove this part. And this is how we would access the value of that meta field that is linking to a meta object. So I'll hit save on that, and then we'll look over here. What we get is a meta object list drop. So it's essentially an object that is actually an array of meta objects. Now you would think, like I had before, that I could just grab the first object in that array and output its name. But for some reason that doesn't work. I'm not sure why. I think maybe that's a bug in Shopify, but you can do this with other arrays in Shopify, other lists, but for some reason it doesn't seem like you can do that when it comes to meta object lists. And that's why I've got this code right here. So we'll just have to loop through them, even though we know that there's only one there. So as you can see here, we can pull off the value of that meta field, which is a meta object list, and then we can access each meta object within that list and output its name. So if I go back to here, this is the output I was expecting before by using first.name. As you can see here, we can pull off each entry in the list. And if I was to, let's say for instance, add another creator, so let's add in Pharrell Williams as well, and then head back here, refreshing a few times. There's a bit of a delay. You can see Pharrell Williams' name comes up as well. All right, so next example I'll show you is, like I said before, this one is not new. That was existing before 2019, but this new Metafield tag, I believe, came out after Metafields were added to the admin in a more user-friendly way. What is this tag? It's the Metafield tag. So I'll hit save on that, and let's see what happens when we output to the front end. So you'll see it looks the same as before, but if I right-click on here and click inspect, you'll see that it wraps the value in a span with a class of meta field number integer. Okay, interesting. If we go into the documentation and let me look up meta field tag, metafield underscore tag, right here in the Liquid documentation, you'll see here that it generates a HTML element to host the metafield data. The type of the element dictates what the output is. So we can use this one filter on a metafield value, and regardless of its type, we're going to get a result that's relevant to that type. Okay, so we only have to use one filter and we get a different result based on the type of the metafield. So as you can see here, Boolean, collection reference, color, date. For our one, we had a number integer, and that's why we get metafield number integer as our class name on a span element. Okay, so if it was a text field, we would get a span with a class of this. If it was a URL, this, so on and so forth. And so this makes it handy, right? If you see the example right here, we can actually loop through a set of metafields, or basically use the same code no matter what the metafield is, and the HTML will change based on the type. What that allows us to do is to write in our CSS some different rules, whether it's a color, whether it's a Boolean, whether it's JSON, so on and so forth. Okay, so interesting feature there. It's not something I often use, to be honest. I just take the value and then put it in my own HTML structure. But an interesting little tag here. I can kind of see where the benefit would be if you don't actually know what type is going to be coming through a certain metafield value. But if you do know the type, then you can just write the surrounding HTML yourself. So yeah, not a super common one that I come across on a day-to-day basis. I don't think I've ever used this feature when coding up custom themes. I always just code the HTML myself, but an interesting one nonetheless, and something that I think has definitely been new since 2019. Heading back into our code here, I've got a few more examples, so I'll comment that one out, and then we'll have a look at this one. As you can see here, this is another example of using metafield tag, but the interesting thing is we can use metafield tag on attributes within a meta object. So I'm not sure if Shopify would class a field within a meta object as a meta field, but it works in the exact same way. So if we go over here, we can see an image coming through. for Michael Jordan, and that's because we've set a photo of Michael Jordan in the photo field of the meta object entry. And if I remove this meta field tag, we can see what comes through normally. It comes through with a GID for a image, which is not very helpful at all. So if I put in this meta field tag, I get an actual image tag with the URL right in there. So if I click inspect on this, you'll see we've got an image tag. It puts in lazy loading, it puts in a class name, it even has the alt text. So a handy little filter here to turn a image object into an image tag on the front end. And then finally, we're going to look at this one right here, which is the meta field text filter. Okay, let's look up the documentation for that. Meta field text. Here we go. It's right under meta field tag. And what it does is it simply creates a text version of the meta field data. So let me actually see what happens if, I'll uncomment this for now, comment this back, change tag to text, and let's see what we get if we run meta field text on an image object. Here we get the URL of the image, which is interesting. And just like meta field tag, the output is going to be different depending on the type of the meta field. So here you can see this is the list right here. And because we were trying to output text on an image object, so where did we have image here? I believe image falls under file reference. Then we get the URL to the file. If it was a variant reference, using this tag would give us the variant title, and so on and so forth, right? So again, another little handy helper filter here that we can use to grab certain aspects of our meta field value. But then there's another way we can use this. If we scroll down, we can see here, we can actually output a list of meta objects in sentence format by adding in this field parameter to the meta field text filter. So that's what I have in this example right here. So if I uncomment that out, you can see I'm going to loop through all the creators meta objects stored within this meta field and output their names. So if I hit save on that, go over to here and refresh, might have to refresh a few times, but here you can see we got Michael Jordan and Pharrell Williams, which is pretty handy. And then if I go into here and let's add in our third creator, hit save, go back to AirPods over here, you'll see we get commas as well. I don't like how it puts a comma before the and, but oh well, we could write some code to fix that, use a split or a replace filter here. But essentially, that is all I wanted to cover with meta fields and meta objects. Obviously, this intersects with the videos I've already made on these topics, but these are sort of the modern updates to the Liquid language specifically that we can take advantage of regarding meta objects and meta fields. All right, at this point, we've covered the two biggest areas that I'm going to talk about in today's video, the media object and then the objects and filters relating to meta objects and meta fields. The rest of this video is going to be pretty quick fire, starting with the app object, which we can see here in the documentation is used to access app specific information for use with theme app extensions. All right, it just has the one property of meta fields, which we can use to access meta fields that are specific to that app. Now, as it says here, this is not related to theme development specifically. This is related to building theme app extensions. So we can't actually use this object within our theme right here. So what I'll do is refer you to my video on theme app extensions for theme developers if you want to learn more about theme app extensions. Similarly, the filter object is something I covered in depth in another video. Obviously, this does relate to theme development. This is the object that you use in conjunction with storefront filtering. If you want to learn more about storefront filtering, you can check out my YouTube video on the topic. I won't go into a demo in this video because that video goes into full detail on how to use the new storefront filtering. Well, it's not particularly new at this stage, but it was new when I covered it, so you can learn more about this filter object in that video. The next one is a weird one, the brand and brand color objects. I say it's a weird one because I've never actually used it or had to use it. So it might actually be a feature from before 2019, but I'm not actually quite sure when it came out. Essentially, we can put in brand assets in our store via our settings, and then we can access these in Liquid. Pretty simple stuff. Essentially, I've never really had to use this because a lot of this stuff I would just store in the theme. For example, a logo and colors are often stored in theme settings. So I don't actually see this pattern playing out a lot, but as it is something that's new to me, I thought I would quickly cover it in this video. So basically, all we need to do is go into our settings for our store, and there's a brand section down the bottom. So we can go down here, and as you can see, we can add in a few different bits of data. We can add in a cover image, description, different colors, and a logo. So I made a fake logo for today's video, Chris Testing Shop logo. Very poor design, but it'll do the trick. And then let me add in, let's say, add in a primary image, or primary color, sorry, of this blue color. And then we also have a contrasting color. So I hit save on that, and now that data is stored within our store, and we can use that data from whichever theme we're using. So I guess the benefit of this is it's stored at the store level. So if we wanted to keep this image file consistent across all themes, it's stored at the store level, which means that no matter what theme we're using, the code that we're about to write will be relevant. Okay, so heading back over to here and going over to here, I've already got the code for this right here. Sorry, I mentioned here a million times. I meant right here in our code editor. And as you can see here, we can access the brand object by referencing the shop object. And obviously the shop object is global. It's available everywhere within our theme. So we can grab the brand object off the shop object. And in order to access that logo, we just grab the logo attribute. And of course it's an image object, so we just need to run it through a filter to get the URL. And then obviously I'm putting it into a tag so that we can see the image on the front end. So if I go over here, you can see we've got the logo coming through. As for the colors, let me just look at the documentation here, and you can see colors. And if we expand this, you can see this is what relates to the other object definition, brand color. So you can see here we've got all these different examples. We just need to go into the colors attribute, and we can grab stuff like this. So let me grab this right here, and what I'm going to do is put it on the main tag. So I'll go into my layout file here, and in the main tag I'll open up a style, and I'll say background and put in that color. Let's hit save on that, and let's see what happens. So as you can see now, we've got that blue color as our background. So obviously if we go over to here and look at colors primary, and we've got primary color within primary, which is a bit confusing with the contrasting color, we're going to get this color coming through when we use this data. And as for the contrasting color, that is going to be foreground. So the contrasting color is foreground, and the primary color is background within this primary color field. But if we had secondary colors down here, we can access them as well. You can see here, we'd go into secondary on our colors array, not primary. So a bit weird, but makes sense. So if I just go into here, color, and I think I've still got this in my clipboard. There we go. So instead of background, I'm going to do foreground. Head back over to here, and now we should see white text on a blue background. All right, so like I said, I've never actually had to use this before. I usually just put this information in the theme settings, but it's a feature that I discovered by making this video, so maybe it's new since 2019, but yeah, not super common. One thing we saw there, actually, I removed the logo, but I'm gonna add it again because I've got something to show you in the next little section here. I'll remove this part though from our main tag, and then I'll head back over to here, and I want to draw your attention to this filter I used. For those of you who have a keen eye and have been studying the documentation, you know that this filter is actually deprecated. So that's the thing I want to cover in this section. If we go to the documentation and I look for the img URL filter right here, you can see this little warning here for deprecated. Now it's interesting, usually when something's deprecated, it doesn't work anymore, or it's soon to not work anymore, but I've been continuing to use or seeing this work for a few years now, so it's not certain when this is going to stop working, but for now it still works. We can still use this image URL filter or img_URL filter in order to get an image. So as you saw me do before, you can put in the dimensions that you want the image to come back at, and it comes through. So it's still working, but obviously it's not encouraged to use a filter that Shopify are calling deprecated. So rather it's encouraged to use the image_URL filter. So I'll click on that, and you can see how we use this. Now, some people might have felt like it was safe to assume that the parameters that we put into this filter are the same, but actually the parameters are different. So if I change this to image URL and keep that same parameter there, you'll see that I'm gonna get a broken image because the parameters have changed now. So to get the same result, what I'm gonna do is put in a width parameter to this image URL filter. All right, so instead of this, I'm gonna get rid of those quote marks, get rid of the X, and then I'm gonna put width in front of that. Hit save on that, and you'll see we get the same result. So it's not really a new feature, but it's a new way of doing it, and it's encouraged by Shopify. I'm not sure why this is deprecated. They haven't explained why, or maybe they have in another article. And we also have image_tag filter to replace the img_tag filter as well. So these work in similar ways. If you want to learn the exact way to use them and the difference in properties, you can of course refer to the documentation. Another strange one that's kind of simple is the replacement of include. Include is now render, as it says here. So include tag has been replaced by render. For those of you who aren't aware, include is what we use, or what we used to use, in order to render a snippet. So to give you a quick demo here, this is super simple, but as you can see, our bare bones project here doesn't even have a snippets folder. But if I create a snippets folder and then I add in a random snippet, I'm even going to just call it random snippet.liquid. And then right here, let's put this in the random snippet, and then I can bring that same code in by using the include tag to bring in a snippet from the snippets folder. So as you can see here, I'll hit save on that, refresh over here, and we get the exact same result, and we can see that include is still working. But as you can see, we got these yellow squiggly line underneath, and it says include is deprecated, convert it to render. So it's encouraging us to change this to render. I think it's a performance thing. If we look at the documentation, obviously if we refresh over here, we get the same result. But if we look at the documentation, it's deprecated because of the way that variables are handled. It was reducing performance and making code harder to both read and maintain. I don't know about this last part. I don't think whether using the word include or render for this tag makes much difference to readability, but there you have it. Shopify are encouraging us to move from include to render, and this is definitely something that has changed since I started working with the language. Getting into the final two parts of this video, let's talk about the preload tag. So as you might know, we can use preloading to prioritize loading of Shopify hosted assets, or any assets for that matter. It's a performance best practice. But what's interesting about this preload tag filter is that I haven't actually seen Shopify use it. So a good place to check what Shopify are actually doing or encouraging with their own themes is to look at the themes that they have developed. And obviously the default one is Dawn. So I'm just going to get out of that brand section. And here you can see I've got Dawn version 12 here. Let me just quickly open that up in my code editor. All right, so here you can see a downloaded version of Dawn version 12. And if I actually search the code base for preload_tag, you'll see that it's not in use anywhere on Dawn, which is interesting that Shopify created this tag and don't use it. Does that mean that in Dawn preloading isn't used at all? No. So if I remove _tag and look at the results that come back in the search, you can see here that they are definitely using preloading, but they're just actually hard coding the HTML rather than using their own tag, which I found interesting. So again, I don't want to go too deep into this because Shopify aren't even using it. And if we look at Dawn version 12 on the front end, so if I go over here, preview Dawn 12 through our store, click to view the page source and search for preload, you can see that it's producing the end result of what a preload tag would produce. But if we look at the code, they're not actually using it. They're just hard coding the link tag in here and then only using Liquid to populate the href field. Okay, so yeah, I don't want to spend too long on this. Shopify is not even using this feature, but it's definitely something that I've seen pop up since 2019. All right, to finish off our list of newer Shopify Liquid features, this one is definitely a newer one, probably the newest on the list, and it came out in September 18th of 2023. You can see here now that this is not a new object, but new attributes on the existing section object. So now, in order to treat a section differently, depending on the position it is in the list of sections, we can now use these attributes. So the perfect example of this is to enable lazy loading of sections below the fold, but preload assets of the sections above the fold. Okay, so another page speed optimization tactic, and now Shopify allows us to read this data so that instead of having to put in like maybe an extra checkbox or run some JavaScript to determine whether a section is above or below the fold or its position on the page, we can now actually read it from a Liquid level. So I'll quickly demonstrate that right now. I won't go into that full feature. Actually, let me just put this back briefly. We don't need this random snippet. That was just for demonstration purposes. So I'll delete this whole folder. And so what we can do here is for every section, we can output some code if the section is first in the list. So if section index, and we can use index 0 or index right here. If we use index, the first section is going to be 1. If we use index 0, the first section is going to be 0. So I'll just use index, not index 0. And then I'll just say first section. And because these sections can be reordered, I'm going to put this on all the sections that could be reordered. Probably not the page template and the product template, but featured image and collection loop. Maybe we would reorder them on the home page, for instance. Let's go into our theme editor right now and see this in action. Let's add in a second section, which is the featured image. Let's hit save. Maybe we have to save first for this to take effect. And then I'll head over here. Let's head back to our home page. And as you can see here, the first section has first section in it. But if I was to rearrange these, so I put collection loop second, and then I refresh, you'll see that the first section has first section on it. Now, it might not be obvious because, of course, I could have put this title outside of the sections altogether. I could have put it in the layout. But if we actually look inside here, that you'll see that this H1 is actually inside this first section. So both of these sections have the code, but it's only going to produce the H1 if it's the first one in the list of sections. So just to do that again, if I put the collection loop section above, you'll see the H1 will come through that section instead. And obviously, this is not the best example running a H1 inside the section, but what we can do is, put other stuff like a different loading strategy for images, maybe a different class. Actually, that probably would have been a better example to put in a class here to say it's first. Obviously, we need a container object because we can't insert it in this section itself unless we use this, which we can't put in a dynamic value. But yeah, if we had a container div, we could check if it's the first and then add a certain class to that section. But yeah, it's a cool new feature that, as it says over here, the main use of it is for lazy loading and fixing web performance issues dependent on the layout position.
So there you have it, guys. 9 things I noticed about Shopify Liquid by reading the documentation that I don't remember knowing about when I first started learning. Like I said at the start of the video, the language doesn't seem to change too much over time, but every now and then there is an improvement. If there's an area you notice that I've missed, definitely leave a comment below. But just as a reminder, as someone who's coding up themes on a weekly basis, anything I didn't cover in this video is probably not that common anyway, so it's not exactly worth diving as deep as possible into every little nook and cranny to try and find differences. The main things are, of course, the media, Metaobject and Metafield objects and filters. There may be some new attributes here and there, but other than that, pretty much everything you've learned about Shopify Liquid so far is still relevant. Just a reminder before we sign off here that for all of you interested in learning the ins and outs of Shopify Liquid, my module on Shopify Liquid is now available on shopifythemedeveloper.com for all of you to learn the core essentials of the language. You can simply head to shopifythemedeveloper.com to check out the module. Otherwise, the link is in the description. Happy coding, and I'll see you on the next one.